Welcome back to Modern Education. This is your host, Benjamin S. Woodford, here in the studio with my co-host, Emily Quiles.
Hello, this is Emily.
And we are back for a Friday afternoon commute from 3 to 4 p.m. like we do every single week. This week, we are excited to have a guest in the studio to do an interview, and we'll bring him on the mic in a minute, but we just want to say hello and thank you for coming back. If you are just tuning in, this is 90.1 KZSU Stanford, and we are here in the Modern Education Radio Hour, bringing you news and talk about education every single week. If you are a parent, teacher, student, anyone interested in learning more about our collective future, understanding how education works, or just having some good old-fashioned talk about whatever is on our minds that week, we hope you'll keep tuning in. You can find us on social media, on Facebook, if you search Modern Education. You can also find us on the Instagram and the Twitters, and you can always tweet us in here in the studio at KZSU DJ or at KZSU. We'd love to hear from you. We see it pop right up in the monitor. And also, if you'd like to call us, the number is 855-723-9010. We broadcast throughout the South Bay and across the world on the internet, streaming live 24 hours a day. So we hope you will keep your dial locked right here to 90.1 KZSU as we bring you a brand new interview today. This is really exciting for me. We've got Eric Abrams in the house. He has just come in through the nasty rainy weather and Bay Area traffic to be here with us today on his not day off, but work from home day. Yeah. Let's bring him on the mic and just say hello. Eric, hi.
Hi, Ben. Hi, Emily. It's really nice to be here.
Oh, we're so excited to have you. So, you are the Chief Inclusion Officer for the Stanford Graduate School of Education.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit more about yourself. Where you come from? Like, what's a little bit about your background?
Sure. I grew up kind of split between the Bay Area and Chicago. I was born in Berkeley. I'm one of those Stanford people who does not hate Berkeley.
That's us too. Yeah.
Went to high school in Chicago, but got myself back to California as soon as I could. So I was actually an undergrad at Stanford 170 years ago. You
don't look that old.
Not on the radio, I don't.
The radio is kind to us all. It's true.
My whole career has basically been in higher education. I was an admissions officer for many years. I did undergrad admissions here, also at USC, MBA admissions here at Stanford, law school admissions at Berkeley. But a few years ago, I shifted my focus to really think more about diversity and inclusion, and worked at the business school at Berkeley for about 6 years as their director of diversity initiatives, and came back to Stanford about 2 years ago as the chief inclusion officer at the GSE.
Well, I can tell you personally, I'm glad you're here.
You and me both.
Yeah. We've had a lot of great conversations. And so we're not necessarily here to talk about diversity today, though, right? Although I think we will definitely touch on diversity in your job, and we want to hear about that as well. So if it comes up, please bring it up. But I did not give you a proper introduction. This is Eric, the gentleman feminist Abrams, and we are here to talk today about being a feminist as a man. And more, I think, just to get out some of these ideas about what feminism means and what it means as a man and how masculinity fits into feminism.
Sure. And I think that, I'm not the first person to say this. You've seen this on T-shirts and bumper stickers around the world. But to me, feminism is the radical idea that women are people.
What? Are you serious?
Thank you so much. I had no clue.
Does that mean men are people too?
Yes.
Whoa.
Men are people too, and even people who don't identify with a gender are people.
What about children? They're people too?
They're people too.
Whoa.
And
people are people.
And
I love that though.
I do have an unconscious bias. I believe that dogs are people, but cats are not.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's definitely true. We're dog friendly around here, although felines deserve a space in the world as well. They're just not people.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I will grant you that.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important for men to think about our place in the world, how we think about feminism, how we think about how to be men. I think it's become very difficult. I can't imagine what it would be like to be 18 or 20 and be an undergrad and try to figure out how to flirt.
Yeah. I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm almost 40.
Well, I think, that's hard on many levels. But in the current times, it's almost like if you say, "Hey, I think you look nice. You have a lovely smile," you're scared somebody's going to take that the wrong way, or they're going to think that you're about to grope them.
Is this professional? Is this acceptable? Where's the line? And I think that's it used to be that the line didn't exist because men did whatever they wanted and women put up with it. And I think I'd rather us be on the other end where we're being a little more cautious and thinking about where that line is and being conscious of it. But at the same time, it's hard to know, and I don't think we're always having the open communication well enough to really know where that line is and how to draw a new line when it's needed. And
I think communication is such the key. And I one thing that I've told my sons, honestly, when it comes to dating.
How many kids do you have?
2 boys, 24 and 22.
Okay.
So they're right in the middle of it, right?
Oh yeah.
And one thing I've told them is like, if you're on a date with someone and the date has gone well, it's perfectly okay to say at the end of the date, especially if it's the first date, even if it's the second date, gosh, I've had a wonderful time. I would really love to see you again. I think we're really hitting it off. Extend your hand, shake hers, say goodnight, and walk away.
Okay. What's the lesson in there? Because I think I might be missing it.
I think the lesson in there is that society has always taught us that a successful date ends with the man making a move, right?
Okay.
We've had a good time, and now I need to lean in for that goodnight kiss. No, you don't. No, you don't. Back up.
Okay. Now I'm gonna push back on that a little bit. Okay. So I think there is a certain, I think it's a tricky situation, but I think there's still a certain expectation, even in this modern age, that a lot of women expect the man to make the first move. And so there's always this sort of balance, right? How much are you supposed to be pushing boundaries because that's your socially accepted or sort of designed role, whether you want it or not, whether you asked for it or not? And how much is that, leave it open and see how it goes, or let the woman make the move? I mean,
I think you hit on it right there.
Yeah.
Let her make the move. If you've told her that you think she's attractive, if you've had a conversation, if you've looked into her eyes and there's actually a vibe there, and you shake her hand and say goodnight, she's going to think, wow, well, maybe she might have some insecurity about maybe he doesn't want me. All the other guys haven't done this. But then when you call or text or snap or Instagram the next day, she's going to know that you're into her, but you're a gentleman.
Yeah. I've been a fan of the ask if a kiss is appropriate. And I think it's such a simple thing to do. And women have been very happy about that approach. Just, hey, would you like to kiss?
Yeah.
And it's not that hard of a thing to do, right?
I love that because it makes me think like back to elementary school. We're like, hey, can I kiss you? Yes, of course. But I think that is like, we're going back exactly to the idea of communication, where you are communicating what you like or what you don't like, and you're giving that opportunity for like a yes or no, not, oh, he just kissed me.
Well, I love how you said back to elementary school, because it's like when we're kids, we're a lot more respectful of each other.
Right.
And we have a lot more understanding of boundaries, I think. Well, at some level, obviously kids don't have a lot of boundaries sometimes, but I think that kids haven't been spoiled by the social expectation as much. So they're much more open to like, hey, do you want to play? Yeah, I want to play. Cool, let's take this tractor. No, I don't want the tractor. I want the ball, right?
Or I don't want to play.
Right.
And kids are very clear that no means no.
Right.
Where is it in adolescence that we forget that no means no?
Yeah, well, I'd say that's socialization, right?
Exactly.
We're socialized to think that we have some sort of domain over other people.
And I think we're also socialized to think, as we were saying earlier, that men should make the first move, that even if that first move is, I've had a really good time, can I kiss you goodnight? It's supposed to be the man that does that. In my experience, and I don't mean to sound like I'm the player of all time. I'm not. I've been married.
Well, you've been married for a long time, so we all know that you're not playing anything.
No. But even with my wife, I think we had 3 or 4 dates, and I was super clear that I thought she was the greatest thing ever. And finally,
so she knew you wanted to kiss her.
Oh yeah.
No doubt.
Question, no doubt. But finally, in a phone conversation, she said, "Why won't you touch me?" And I was like, well, I think you're gorgeous. I'm totally into you, but I want to be respectful of your boundaries. I don't want to push too far. I figured if it got to that point, it would come up in conversation. And it did.
amazing. It's like you don't need to press the issue, because if two people like each other, the issue is going to come up.
The issue is going to come up.
This reminds me of the kind of saying about teenagers, right? If you're not mature enough to talk about sex, you're not mature enough to have sex. And it kind of fits that same paradigm of like, if you're not mature enough to have a conversation that we'd both like to kiss each other, maybe our relationship isn't mature enough to have a kiss be part of it, right?
And I think one of those things that's a very important corollary in the context of a university campus is if the first time that you're kissing, making out, going further, and one or both of you is tipsy, drunk, high, stop.
Well, there's no consent.
Right.
There's no capacity for
There's no
consent.
capacity to consent. And yet I won't say we, but I did back in the day, but we find ourselves in these situations.
Well, society pretty much tells us that's the way things happen.
Right.
Watch a movie, right? 2 drinks, 1 kiss, having sex. Next morning.
Right.
That's the progression.
and I'm convinced that, and I know I'm talking from the guy's point of view, but I'm convinced that in that situation, if you're the guy, if you look at the woman and say, hey, wait, you know what? I think we're both tipsy. Let's just go to sleep. I'll call you tomorrow. I'll text you tomorrow.
See his face, ladies and gentlemen. He's doing a tipsy face right now. He is a good actor. This is beyond radio.
But I'm convinced that if a guy does that and says that, and the next day rolls around, if she's into you, she's going to think you're the greatest guy ever.
Well, because you basically are.
And if she's not, everybody wins.
Well, it saves a lot of trouble, really. I mean, I personally think it's much better to find out someone doesn't like me before we've slept together. It just seems like a natural thing.
Yes.
Sort of the bare minimum. Can you stand me? Am I a reasonably nice person that you want to talk to when you're not drunk? Right?
I wonder then from like because the girl's perspective typically is like, okay, he'll make that move. It's kind of the assumed bit, like that, yes, he will make the move and then it'll go from there. And I wonder, how is that like pressure manifested in like as a man, what it means to be a man, to like have all those social pressures to make that move, to do the like all of the XYZ to get the relationship. And is it fair?
I don't. Fairness aside, I don't think it's fair. I also don't think it's right. Any relationship that involves 2 people should involve 2 people, not just one person doing all of the heavy lifting, whether that heavy lifting is, can I call you? Can we go out? Can we kiss? Whatever the heavy lifting may be, it should be a 2-way street.
Well, it kind of reminds me of like the hunter-prey dynamic, when only one person is the person doing the pursuit. And that does not seem like a dynamic that I want in my relationship.
No.
Like if I'm hungry and I don't have any meat, I want to be the hunter. I'm going to find a piece of animal to kill, and that is the prey. And that's a perfectly fine situation to have that dynamic. But when it's like a person that I want it to be an equal on an equal footing and have a relationship with, I don't want to be the only one that's pursuing this.
Not at all.
I would like flowers once in a while. I mean,
and
it's not
to be told that you're cute. To be told that you have a nice smile.
I'm pretty. I want to be pretty.
I have to say, you both have wonderful smiles.
Oh,
that is so sweet. And don't worry, we're not going to read too much into it, because it's okay.
No.
It's okay to give people compliments and just enjoy it as a compliment, right? And I think that's another piece of it is like, why can't, or you kind of brought this up in the beginning about like flirting or hitting on someone in the workplace, but at the same time, even just interacting with people, there's a lot of room to be nice and to be kind and to not need ulterior motives for that, right?
There's a ton of room to be nice and be kind. And I think that if you're nice and kind and gentlemanly from the start in the workplace, and then 6 months, a year after you're on the job, you see a colleague and you say, hey, Emily, gosh, I really like that top. You look very nice today. I don't think she's going to think that you're the pervert of life jumping out from behind the file cabinet. She's going to think, wow, that's the night. He's been nice all along, and now he just gave me a compliment.
Unless it depends what top it is, actually. But
well,
okay, fair enough. But anyway, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, messing with you a little bit. But yeah, and I think there's so much room for just better communication between men and women. And this is something that I've been thinking about and even talking with a friend yesterday about, is there needs to be more open communication around flirting and sexuality and things like that, because these are human things. Everybody has this as part of their life. And when it's so taboo and it's so hard to just engage in a normal conversation about it, then any conversation becomes weird or awkward or hard to have.
And I think we can broaden that from relationships, right? I think there are a lot of conversations that don't happen, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's about faith or ethnicity or relationships or gender or sexual orientation, I think there's an assumption that you're just supposed to know everything and never ask. And so if you have a friend who's got a different background or who's of a different gender and you're curious about, hey, how come, it can be very difficult to ask that question. I would love to create an environment where it's actually not difficult to ask those questions. You can actually say, you know, I heard that
XYZ.
XYZ.
Right? Yeah.
And, you know, the person, oh, that's ridiculous. You know, that anytime somebody starts anything with I heard, whatever comes next is false. And you go, yeah, that's true.
Well, you know, I heard that whatever comes after I heard is false. Is that false now? Instantly found a paradox. Sorry. Anyway, yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
No. I was just going to say it's a problem for talking with people who are smarter than I am.
I don't think that's ever true. I think, you know, the thing about smarts is we all have different types of intelligences. And I'm not talking about like bodily or auditory intelligence, but I'm talking about life experience intelligence. And I think, you know, I don't think this is pretty well known in Western society. We value pretty much one type of intelligence. It's logical, visual, spatial reasoning. And that's kind of the height of what we think of as intelligence. And to me, that is missing so much of the, you know, the emotional intelligence.
It is missing a lot. And I think it gets us into a lot of trouble in the workplace. And I know this is far from the original topic, but I was in a workshop.
Tangents here. This is our thing. Yeah, go.
I was in a workshop earlier this week, and it was we did a simulation, and we're trying to persuade that there's a simulation trying to persuade university leadership to change.
Okay, that's a tough nut to crack.
It is a tough nut to crack, and then it's really fun simulation and teams of smart people working together. The only thing that worked, the only strategy that worked, was repeated face-to-face conversations.
Yeah.
You could email people, you could do all these different strategies, but you need to build a level of trust first.
Right.
And I think that if we can, again, create environments, sometimes I think that sometimes the most fruitful environments for these kind of conversations are in undergraduate dorms, where you find people having crazy conversations from 11 at night till 4 in the morning, right? About all kinds of subjects. And when people can be really open and honest and vulnerable in those conversations, a ton of learning happens.
Yeah.
But as we get a little bit older, it's harder to have those conversations. You know, you can't.
Well, it's also harder to find that much like close knit connection, right? You're not staying in a tiny little dorm with 3 or 4 other people.
Right.
You have much more space in between each other. You know, there's this idea, this word and idea, propinquity. It's the idea of closeness or proximity to other people, right? And the great example is like Hitler's chancellery. He had this big grand hall going up to his quarters, right? And it presents this grandeur that made it impossible to question his authority.
Yeah.
And when you take away all the distance between people like that, and you become more accessible and open, you know, your door is always open to your office. You're always happy to talk to people. But I bet you, and I'm just going to throw this out there as a conjecture, I bet you're closest to the people that are, you know, 4 or 5 doors away or less.
Yeah, I think for the most part that's true.
Yeah.
And I think that happens in all different types of situations, right? But
yeah.
I remember my own, conversations I had in my own college dorm, and I will be the first to admit I was incredibly clueless as a college freshman.
I think that's all freshmen. Yeah.
And I'd even gone to an all-male high school. So when it came to gender issues, I had no idea.
Well, you learned somewhere along the way. Do we have your wife to thank for that? I feel like you had a few tricks up your sleeve before you were married. So where did this come from for you?
In some ways, I probably have my mom and grandmothers and aunts and such to thank for it. But I also think I have a bunch of women who I won't name who lived in my freshman dorm, who lived in my dorm my sophomore year, who weren't afraid if I said, hey, how come I heard that, dude, I was at this party the other night and I thought this woman was really cute and I asked her to dance and she looked at me and laughed. Well, what, huh? Oh,
Yeah.
And to have relationships with people who would actually offer their opinions. I don't know if they were right or wrong, but I there was trust built.
Yeah, and it gives you an opportunity, whether it's right or wrong, the advice you're getting, it gives you an opportunity to appreciate another perspective.
Right.
And to me, that is sort of the crux of the matter between femininity or masculinity or feminism or humanism, whatever you want to look at, however, whatever lens you want to look at it through, is perspective taking of other people.
Yes.
And learning to even value a perspective that's not your own, no matter how different it is, no matter how wildly divergent someone else's opinion is from yours. You don't need to agree with it necessarily, but you learn by taking in these other perspectives.
And you can also, if I can torture it a little bit, I think you can also enjoy it for what it is, as opposed to look at what it's not. Right?
Sure.
Whether it's an artist, right, a female singer, you can appreciate her voice rather than sit there and think, gosh, if she had more voice, I might. No, that's not what you're there for.
Right.
Same thing with women's sports. I think that as a sports junkie, I don't think there are too many women who can play in the NBA. Does that mean I don't enjoy watching women's basketball? No, women's basketball is great. But it's a different thing. Just because it's different doesn't mean it's better or worse. It doesn't have to be a value judgment. It's just different.
Right. And I think that's a great point as well. I mean, thinking about what is right and wrong is sort of a trap in and of itself, right?
Yes, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, as soon as you make it right or wrong, black or white, us or them, you've already fallen into the trap, and then it's not about understanding anymore. Right. It's about, differences or similarities.
But if you can approach conversations with positive curiosity, with the idea that you're going to, I'm curious about this, I don't know, but I'd like to learn, as opposed to, I don't know anything about this. It's weird. It's different.
Well, I think that's a self-protection mechanism, right?
Absolutely.
When we see something that's really foreign to us or we don't understand it yet, it's much easier to be like, I want no part of that, because it feels foreign and it's easier to kind of keep your distance than it is to get in the mud, so to speak, right? And I see this a lot as a math education person. People stay away from math just because they find it easier than taking the risk of digging in. Right. Yeah, I always go back to math. This is not a math conversation today, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, what I find really interesting when I was kind of looking into who you are was how you said we have to be quick to call out and quick to answer or to apologize, and to create this environment where we're both calling out and also putting ourselves back and reflecting ourselves and being willing to, because going back to human mechanism, to not accept or show that you've done something wrong. How would you say that the best way to self-reflect in a situation that maybe you've been called out, how is the best way to react off of that?
Sure. I think I'll be the first to admit I don't think it's easy at all. This is one of those situations where it's very challenging to put yourself in the other person's shoes, but that's exactly what you need to do. As opposed to immediately, okay, I'm going to defend to protect. Wow, this person is hurt. Even if I disagree with why they're hurt, I can have empathy for the fact that they are hurt. And I can apologize. I am sorry that I hurt you, Emily. I'm sorry that I hurt you, Ben, as opposed to, I'm sorry if anyone out there was offended.
Well, that's a more personal approach, right? You're not talking about some general oops, but it's
very specific to what happened. And then genuinely, even if you've only got 30 seconds, I've only got a moment, but I would love to talk to you more about why you're hurting and what I did about it. How can I fix it? And then I think the best thing, I didn't come up with this, a colleague of mine mentioned it at a conference, and I will never forget it. The best apology includes a follow-up a week later. You call,
I'm still thinking about it.
Right. Ben, I know that thing happened a week ago. I don't want to rehash it, but I want to let you know I'm still thinking about it. I'm still sorry.
Yeah.
Has anybody ever, if that happens, don't you feel great? Don't you feel like that person really is sorry and maybe has learned and your relationship can actually go forward?
Well, hopefully they've reflected on it, had more time and space to think about what they've done, or by going back a week later, it feels like it's another reminder that it's like you're saying, still in their head.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, I think that one of the problems that we have on college campuses is we don't do that. somebody says something that offends us, whether it's sexist or homophobic or racist or anti-faith or pro-faith or democratic, but it doesn't matter. But somebody says something that offends us, and rather than confront them and say, wow, Ben, that really bothers me, let me tell you why, I don't say anything. I walk away, hold on to it, and then 4 years later, somebody's like, you know this guy, Ben Woodford? I'm like, oh, I hate that guy. Because he's never had the chance to say, oh, geez, I'm sorry.
You know, I think, and this goes into so many different areas, I think this is basically the Rosetta Stone of relationships, honestly.
Like what your parents should be teaching you.
Well, yeah, because the thing is our feelings need to be expressed. And every time we have a feeling that isn't expressed in a relationship, it builds up, it festers, it sours, it coagulates into something more than it should be. And when we have a feeling today and we don't express it today or in the moment when it happens, now it becomes harder and harder to talk about it and even less and less relevant, but it doesn't change our ability to hold on to it and be hurt by it.
And to return to the concept of the gentleman feminist, I think a gentleman is at least on the path to understanding that. They might not be all the way there, but they're on the path and they're trying to understand that people do have different feelings. You know, my feelings are different than yours. They're different than yours. Your feelings are different than mine. And some things might happen that, you know, you think are fine, I think are offensive or vice versa, but we can move past it. And I can be, not to torture the word, but I can be gentle about it. I think that our society lacks a level of gentility and civility right now.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that comes from the lack of other people's perspective taking. We're not so inclined to say, hey, you have a feeling, so it's correct. It doesn't matter if I agree with it. Doesn't matter if your reasoning for that feeling is something that I feel is justified. Because you're feeling it, I need to honor it.
Right.
And that's something that I think is missing in a lot of the conversations here is we can look at it and say this is right or it's wrong and here's why I think so. But that's missing the whole point of sharing our feelings is not so someone else can judge them. It's so that we can be understood.
Right. It's kind of like the old saying that forgiveness is not for the person who you're forgiving. It's actually for yourself. It's so you're not carrying around being mad at them. Why don't, you know, I think that that's something, again, as a gentleman, we can do. We should try to be more forgiving. We should try to be more accepting. That doesn't mean we agree with everything that's out there, but you can try to see something from a different perspective. I probably shouldn't say this, but I have to tell this story because I found it hilarious. I was talking to a colleague who's on the university's affordability task force right now. And she was saying the task force got the call from the spouse of an emeritus professor who said, you know, all of this talk about affordability doesn't take into account that it could negatively affect the value of my home and my ability to pay for my grandchildren to go to college. Now, I might disagree with that perspective, but that's a real feeling. This is somebody who really thought, like, look, my family worked for 50 years to buy this house and to build this nest egg. And if you reduce the value of it, and I think that's the sort of thing that a lot of people wouldn't think of, that opinion had value. It has a great deal of it. You can disagree with it, but her opinion has value. Right.
And that's the same thing about just taking it in and understanding that the other person's perspective is valid, whether or not you want it to be, whether or not you are in a situation where you can empathize with that exact point of view.
Yeah.
And
as a staff member who lives, works at Stanford and lives in Oakland and commutes a couple of hours a day, yes, I would love there to be more affordable housing nearby. Right. But I can understand other points of view. I don't have to agree with them, but I can listen to them.
Sure, exactly. And that's not happening in our daily discourse, I think, sadly, especially in the political arena where our leaders are supposed to be having these open and leadership-oriented conversations, and it's diverging down into just sort of the muck, right?
Well, and it certainly, when it comes to conversations about gender and relationships, I mean, we're not getting good examples at all from the very top of American leadership. No, stop there.
Yeah. Let's not go there today. We do that way too often anyway.
Politics, my favorite. I mean, because when I was like looking up, kind of it seems like what you're talking about as well can be applied to like the the new world of diplomacy, like how we work without wars or aggression. Instead, it's about like talking about our feelings. Like, how do I feel when you do this to my country? Or like, when you do this, this is how it's affecting the population. It's just like this type of understanding or communication, it can like completely change so many different sectors in the world. It's not just education. It's not just like how you communicate to your peers. It goes into all these different sectors. At least that's how I'm thinking.
No, I agree. And I think that if we get to the point where we can understand the feelings of others as being valid as our own, even when we disagree with them, then the divides that exist in society will start to break down, because we'll all see each other as people who have value and are thoughtful and worthy of our respect. It doesn't mean we're going to agree. It doesn't mean we're going to agree, but it might mean that we're like, wow, I never thought about it that way. Huh.
Yeah.
I still disagree.
Yeah. And that's okay. And, you know, this is something that came up one time in a talk that I attended. They were talking about the founding fathers creating the Constitution, right? And they sat down, you know, had this bipartisan discussion about the Constitution and what that was all going to be. And at the end of it all, when it was over, they all went out and had drinks together. Both sides, everybody just shook hands and put it aside, and then still were able to have a civilized connection and conversation. And that, I think, is, you know, in some ways an ideal to think about, at least, that we can disagree, we can have differences, we can hash them out and not even like each other's opinions when it's all said and done, but we can still respect each other.
In fact, in many ways, I think that's one of the fun parts of life, is having conversations with somebody who's smart and thoughtful and sensitive and totally disagrees with you on something. And you talk over a beer or a glass of wine or a soda or a sandwich for an hour. You may not change your opinion, but you have a much broader perspective.
It's really hard to talk over a sandwich because you want to eat that sandwich at the same time.
I'm demonstrating that I'm hungry.
Yeah. Well, we have some hors d'oeuvres waiting in the foyer for you. We don't really. Sorry. This is not a catered event. Where are we going to go next, Emily? I'm going to stall for a minute while you look at your notes.
Well, I'm thinking a bit of how, so typically, like how we're talking about emotions, and as a man, like kind of, I feel like one of the sad bits about feminism is that it doesn't fully talk about the man side of how emotions aren't talked about when you're young. And just how would you say, or would you say that feminism is missing a big point of masculinity? Like, what does it mean to be a male?
I would not at all say that feminism as a movement is missing that point. I think there certainly may be individual feminists who miss that point. I may be one of them, as somebody who likes to describe themselves as a feminist. I don't know that I know everything, but I do think, like I said, I do think that most people who define themselves as feminist are not anti-male in any stretch of the word. They're just pro-female. And those
Sure.
You can be one. You can be both. You don't have to be anti-male to be pro-female.
Yeah, it doesn't automatically make you anti-male
No.
to be pro-female, right?
It doesn't make you, to use something else that I find myself thinking about. I don't think it makes me anti-white to be pro-black.
Right.
I don't
right.
think saying Black lives matter is saying other lives don't matter.
Right.
These lives matter too.
Yeah, that's something that other people try to make the case because it's their like convenient way to reframe something that fits their worldview,
Right.
but it's not really the point, right?
No. And so I think I think, like I said, I think maybe the first thing I said, the largest point of feminism is the radical idea that women are people, period. That
Right.
they have every, emotion, thought, whatever any man could have, a woman can and should have too. And there should not be this huge divide between the genders. And quite frankly, it's not sustainable. As we, this is an entirely different subject, but as the world becomes more and more hyper-competitive and hyper-capitalist, a society that only takes advantage of the talents of half of its people is going to fall far behind than a society that takes advantage of all of its people. Now, that may not be the moral argument for feminism, but I think it's true.
I heard a really funny argument the other day because right now there's more women graduating college than men. that if things keep going along this trend, eventually we're going to have affirmative action for men to be able to actually get jobs again.
People joke about that.
Who run the world?
Right.
Girls.
People joke about that, but you know what? We already see it happening, and I can give you a couple of examples of it.
Yeah.
If you look at, let's say, the world of small liberal arts colleges, they are by and large 65% female. In an effort to attract more men, many of these colleges either won't cut or have started Division III football teams. Because guys want to play, even though I can't get a scholarship, I'm not good enough to play at Stanford or Cal or USC, I can play at Rhodes College. I can play at Trinity College.
Sure.
And at if you think of a school that has a student body of 1,500 people, if it's 60 or 65% female, but then you have an extracurricular activity that's going to bring 100 guys to campus, that really can help balance things out if balance is what you're looking for. So I think in many ways we're seeing affirmative action for men start to trickle in. Think about all of the you know this far better than I do, but think about all of the stuff there is right now in the education world about boys in school. People aren't focusing on girls in school because girls as a group are kind of kicking butt in school, right?
Yeah. And I think a large part of that, I think, is that women have been brought up more to recognize that school is a very important part of moving up in the world. And men have been able to get by for so long with, just having the privilege of being a man,
being a guy.
Right?
Yep.
And so now I think, I hope actually that the pendulum swings the other way for a while, and then somewhere in between, I think it'll equal out. But
I think it's swinging the other way. And again, I think there are examples of it we all see. We just don't think about it on a macro level. And I'll give you one. If you go to any high school or college and pick up the newspaper or look at the website that's student run, you'll find the vast majority of the leadership is female.
Well, yeah, I mean, grade schools are basically majority female ran.
Right.
I mean, sadly, it's still like a lot of men are running the math classes and things like that, which is.
But I'm not even talking about from the administrative point of view. I'm talking about like the extracurricular activities, who's writing the editorial in the school paper, who's the student body president, the leadership roles that are open to both genders, I think are, and this is anecdotal. I haven't done a study on this. There are probably people in our department who have.
There's a study for everything. we have too much information these days.
But it feels to me that type of leadership, the extracurricular leadership, the outside of classroom leadership, and the kicking butt in the classroom is really very much majority female.
Yeah, and I think you're bringing up a point within this point that is something that's really important in my mind, is the ability to have a voice in today's society. And that is something that has been restricted for thousands of years, if not hundreds of years, that only certain people ever really had a voice. It was people who were able to read and write, which was very few up until, the last 100 years. That's changed quite a bit. But people who could read and write, people who were in positions of power like clergy and monarchs and things of that nature, right? And now we're coming into a world where anybody can have a voice. And that, I think, has been a huge piece of opening all these conversations up. Me Too, Black Lives Matter, all of these, I think, are centered around this sort of openness of who can have a voice in today's society and who can put themselves out there for other people to hear and see what they're thinking. I
think the challenge is that as individuals, we try to democratize that in our own heads. In other words, as we're listening to podcasts, we don't only listen to podcasts we already know and like or that were recommended by a friend. If we're listening to music, we don't only listen to the music we've already heard. I think one of the things that's a little bit sad is as different groups gain voice, they often find a way to step on a group that's below them. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought this up, because to me, this is really the biggest shortcoming in all of these civil rights and social movements that are happening right now, is it's always taking one little subsection of people and saying, let's focus on making it better for them. And the reality to me is we have more of a social class issue than anything else right now. There's definitely still racism. There's definitely still sexism. There's definitely still classism and all these other things. But to me, the biggest divide is not between you and me.
we're in similar boats, right? But it is between the people who are making big decisions and are considered people as a corporation versus the people who are actual people trying to make it in a tough world where most of us in some way work for a corporation.
Yep.
Right. And every time we take a little subsection and say, this is where it matters, we're missing that we're all in the same boat.
Exactly. And if we create structures and ways to make everything better for everybody, then those other groups will see that and like, oh, I want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of that. One thing that I get asked about a lot by colleagues at work is, Eric, how do we do a better job of recruiting this group of students? Mm-hmm. It's like, well, I think we make it known and do everything we can to make sure that our community is great for everybody.
Like just do a better job of recruiting students.
Do a better, and not just a better job of recruiting students, do a better job of making sure the students are content and happy when they're there. Because I think word of mouth is incredibly powerful. And if, I had the experience as an undergrad of visiting a college where one of the guys who was on my tour was like, man, don't come here. Wow. Okay. Yeah. I didn't.
Yeah. And it only takes one, really.
It only takes one. But if we create an environment where all the students, anytime they meet anybody, is like, oh my God, I'm not saying this place is perfect, but they're trying. They mean well. And let me give you a couple of examples. I think that will, that rising tide will actually lift all boats.
Yeah, I agree. And you can't fake that.
No.
You can't buy it. You can't fake it. There's no way you can pretend that you've got something good going on for long if you don't. Right? And that's kind of the crux of the matter is you can't talk the talk if you're not walking the walk, right? You can't get people to say that you're doing a great thing unless you actually are.
Unless you actually are.
Right.
At least unless you're trying hard. I do believe there are times when we swing the bat, we try something big, hairy, and audacious, and we don't succeed. But people see that we're trying, and they still are kind of on our side.
Well,
right?
Success is not really the goal. I think when we frame it that we only are successful if we are succeeding, that's a misnomer, because the reality is we're successful if we're making the effort in the right direction. And every time we make that effort, we don't always succeed. Most of the time we don't really succeed. It's just pushing that needle a little bit at a time. And as we're doing that, we are creating change because we're changing the conversation. We're changing our priorities. We're changing outcomes, but it may not be the one we wanted, but at least we're pushing in the right direction.
I couldn't agree more, but I have to say I've become aware that a lot of this conversation around being a gentleman feminist has been between two gentlemen when there is a woman in the room. So I would like to hear your voice more, Emily.
Hi. We're sharing a mic, so it's a bit difficult.
Yeah, we're really crammed in the studio like sardines here today.
But, well, you kind of just, boom, hello. Well, I think, because I was kind of looking into, one interesting point that you said was that you're not trying to win the hearts and minds of people or trying to persuade them. You're trying to just show that that we are working together in this together. And I was kind of thinking about, so after the Me Too movement, in particular, after that, there was a big backlash on Twitter who said, not all men. And kind of going off of how you're saying, when you include everyone in that conversation, maybe it has less of the ability to fracture off into, well, I'm not like that. I'm not like this. And yeah, I just find it interesting, in the sense of how social movements can sometimes be selective in who they are targeting or possibly getting the message to, and then sometimes leaving other people out of that conversation, and really how those social phenomenons or backlashes, how I'm saying fragmentations of it, end up occurring. Because when I'm seeing this Me Too movement, and then men go, well, not me, I'm like, I know, maybe it's not you, but that's not the point.
Right.
And go you're saying with Black Lives Matter, well, what about White Lives Matter? No, that's not the point.
They matter too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's so much I want to say, and I feel like I'm going to be a little bit jumbled, so forgive me. But I think that I think when it comes to Me Too and not all men, my pushback would be, all right, not all men, just 99 and 44 100% of us. And I purposely use the word us. I'm pretty sure I was never Louis C.K. I'm pretty sure I was never Harvey Weinstein. Having said that, I think I told you this once before, Ben, I have a really, really clear memory of being on Manhattan Beach with some friends years and years ago, and there being an attractive woman like 25 yards away. I didn't realize how hard I was staring at her until she got up and moved and gave me a dirty look. And literally since that day, I felt bad about that. And when we talk about not all men, there's actually a group of guys, some on campus, most off, who've had some conversations about what it means to be a man and things like this. And one of the things that we've come up with is, look, I can never find that woman, right, and apologize to her. But I think that just about every woman I know has probably had some sort of uncomfortable experience. Hopefully it didn't rise to the level of Weinstein or Louis C.K. or even our president, but there was somebody who stood too close to you on a bus or a train. There was somebody who looked at you too long or made you feel uncomfortable or something. What if, as men, we can't apologize to those women, but we can apologize to the women we know on behalf of other men? Like, I don't know what happened to you, Emily. I hope nothing has ever happened to you. But what if I can say, I'm genuinely sorry for whatever may have happened to you from another guy, because I know some crap I did, and I can't apologize to her.
Is that a meaningful apology, though?
I don't know.
I mean, what do you think, Emily? Is it a meaningful apology for a man to apologize to you on behalf of other men's shortcomings or transgressions?
I mean, I'd rather hear it from them themselves, but I would at least say that I appreciate the fact that you've thought about it, that you've reflected, and that you've thought, okay, maybe the actions that I've done isn't right. And I think that's really more of like the point that needs to be like said. Yeah, that it's the reflection that you're not, that these things that may have felt normal to be as a man, like that was just a social norm to be a man, and then seeing, okay, obviously, maybe that wasn't my intention, but the reaction, the way that it was received was wrong. At least to the sincerity of the sorry, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think you've raised another really interesting point that I think that people in general and men in particular probably don't think about enough, and that is the difference between intent and impact. For the folks on the radio, y'all can't see this. I'm 6'5", I weigh 270 pounds. I'm a big dude. If you'll let me run with an analogy, I also ride a motorcycle. I mean, I do. I didn't today because it's raining, but I do. So
that's good. It's safer to stay off the bike today.
So imagine that it wasn't raining. It's a beautiful sunny day. I decide to ride the bike, but because it's such a beautiful day, I'm a little bit late. So I rush in, right? A little bit late. I've got on my giant steel shanked motorcycle boots, and I accidentally step on Emily's foot as I walk in the room. I didn't mean to hurt you. You seem like a very nice person. Why would I want to hurt you? That was not my intent whatsoever. You still got a broken foot. And if I don't deal with the impact of my actions, my intent doesn't matter. If I don't say, oh my goodness, how do we do? Ben, what are we going to do? We're going to get to the hospital. How do we deal with this broken foot? If I don't deal with
we're calling off the show. We're taking care of the co-host.
Exactly.
I don't care. There's no question there.
One has to deal with the impact of their actions before you start to defend the intent. And I think that's where a lot of people, both in private and public life, get confused or mixed up. Where I didn't mean to hurt anybody, so why is anybody hurt?
Yeah. You know, I want to take this a slightly different direction because I think there is a big responsibility for men to call each other out on these things. Like, let's go back to your moment, right? You're sitting at the beach. You're accidentally or inadvertently staring real hard at a girl, right? And I'm sitting there with you. At some level, I think it's my responsibility to tap you on the shoulder and be like, hey, have you got enough yet? Right. Look, there's stuff going over that way too, right? And I think this is something that should be happening more within just the world in general is calling each other out, because a lot of times women, like let's say a group of men are heckling a woman walking by, which happens all the time. This is not a rare occurrence. And I'd say ask any woman that you know and she'll tell you a horror story about some awkward moment she had with guys doing weird things.
That happened yesterday. Like literally.
Well, I can apologize on behalf of men, but I don't know if that actually is that meaningfully. We haven't got to the bottom of this yet. But the point is, if you're a man in that group and you're not taking the initiative to say, hey, guys, chill out, that's not okay to do, you're clearly making her feel uncomfortable, then you are part of the problem as well.
Right.
And that is something that I think men need to understand is their responsibility.
I couldn't agree more. I think the one thing that I would add is that it's important to find a way that feels comfortable and feels authentic.
Sure.
And doesn't cost you friendships. Right? Well, I mean, maybe you do want it to cost you a friendship.
I mean, at some level, maybe those aren't the friendships you want to have.
Sure.
But I think your point maybe is more that the way we communicate matters, because if you're abrasive and just as hurtful as the people who are doing something offensive, then you're just part of the problem too.
If you get on your high horse and like, hey, don't talk to women like that. No one should talk to women like that. Don't you know better?
Not the woman.
Nobody's gonna. But you know, if you're like, oh, come on, dude.
Yeah,
look.
like, can you imagine how it would feel if a group of women were doing that to you and you were all alone and feeling vulnerable? Or I don't know.
And then even if like having been a guy for a long time, I can predict the typical male reaction of
lifetime.
That. Right?
Yeah.
Would be, oh, dude, I would love it if a bunch of girls surrounded me on the beach and said stuff about my body. It's like, really? Would you really?
But I don't.
Would you really? Because I see your body.
And right.
You don't want me talking about it.
You're not going to like the things they're saying.
No,
right?
Not so much.
Yeah. And your point is really well taken, though, because how you say it matters just as much as whether or not you say it. And if the goal is to create change and not just to make people feel bad for their actions, it's very important how you go about bringing that up. And, you know, maybe in the moment you can be like, guys, just stop. And then 5 minutes later, you can be like, hey, here's why I said that. Or, you know, you can try to be adult about it, and depending on your friends, it may or may not work out.
And it's truly, depending on your friends and how well you know them, I think there are ways to say something like that both stops them in their tracks, has a bit of humor and thought, and doesn't squash the relationship.
Right.
You know, you can say somebody's staring at you. You could say, you know, your friend is staring at somebody. You can say like, yeah, dude, I get how cute she is. I was looking at your sister like that.
Puts it in perspective, though, doesn't it?
Right. I was looking at your...
Yeah, bro, you can't look at my sister like
that. Right. But then there's room for a conversation.
She is somebody's sister, too. Right. Right. Yeah. That's great. I love the framing there, because it's like, yeah, I saw someone looking at your mom that way yesterday. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, crap. Right. I don't want to do that. I don't want someone looking at my mom like that, you know, and that's, I think, that's such gold right there. Just reframing things in the perspective where it's a little more personal. It seems is the kind of underlying strategy, right?
We're going back to the golden rule of treat those as you'd like to be treated.
And that's great to make that connection, because the reality is, I think that's really what feminism is kind of underlying. Is it's not about women like ruling the world and men being the servitude or whatever, right? Although, you know, that's not like let's let the pendulum. I'm okay with the pendulum swings that way for a little while, but in general, I think the reality is just remembering that everybody deserves the exact same treatment that you do.
Everybody deserves a voice. Everybody deserves the right to vote. Everybody deserves to be able to be elected.
Everybody to feel safe,
to be a Supreme Court justice, to be whatever it is that someone wants to be.
A rocket scientist.
Or to be a stay-at-home mom.
Or dad.
Or stay-at-home dad, which I did for a couple of years. I think that humanism, feminism is about making sure that everybody has equal access to choice.
You know, I don't think we can end it better than that. And this hour is just about up. So I'm going to say thank you, Eric. It's been amazing having you on the air. We really appreciate you taking the time to come talk with us. I am Ben Woodford, the host of Modern Education.
This is Emily Quiles.
This has been a great conversation. Hopefully those of you out there listening have had a really great time listening to Eric Abrams from the Graduate School of Education. He's the Chief Inclusion Officer, sitting down today to talk with us about feminism, masculinity, living in the world today and how to navigate some of these issues, maybe with a little bit more class, like a gentleman.
Exactly.
So thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.